We find ourselves post 9/11 in a world that has a growing global movement of violent extremists motivated by an Islamist ideology. We have a number of weak and failing states that are finding it very difficult to provide for the basic needs of their people. And you put those two together and you have the makings of small scale, or small and some large, interconnected insurgencies in many countries of the world.
If the civilian is the center of gravity, securing and protecting is the main function of military forces, not destroying. If restraint in the use of military force is fundamental to the successful prosecution of the campaign, then that is in fact the opposite of overwhelming force. If non-military capabilities are the key to success in counterinsurgency, then not only is there primacy on non-kinetic means, at least in theory, but success itself is defined differently. It is most definitively non-decisive. I say this with no small degree of regret, but I do think we have to remain open to the possibility that the fundamental assumptions on which counterinsurgency is premised, in some ways U.S. foreign policy has been premised, this notion of a progressive, liberal, ever-improving world in which there are common interests shared by all mankind. We need to stay open to the possibility that we could be fundamentally wrong about that assumption. The Army's filling a vacuum left by political leadership. And it's simply unfair, I think, to expect the Army or a military institution to do sort of the classic ends, ways, and means equation when there has not been an adequate articulation of the overarching strategy. So you have an institution that's grappling with what is essentially an unfunded mandate, which is 3000.05. You have them struggling with concepts such as building partnership capacity, struggling with the notion of what the threat is and using broad phrases like persistent conflict, and struggling with the notion of what it means to be a full spectrum force when the demands externally for overall USG capabilities far exceed anything that the US itself or the military itself or the US Army alone can begin to provide. The US as a whole, as a nation, tends to swing between extremes. Our foreign policy history is rich with this vacillation between isolationism and being a hyperpower in its most recent valence. And we have today, in the context of this hybrid threat, a chance to focus on a middle ground, I think, and an opportunity to do that, because I see either of those extremes as being extremely harmful to U.S. national security.
If an Army organized, designed, trained, and equipped for conventional combat finds itself fighting insurgencies, there are going to be individuals who pay attention to what's going on, the sharper knives in the drawer. And in this particular case, two of the sharpest knives were men named Petraeus and Mattis, right? And both men remarkable commanders in Iraq as major generals. Petraeus, in command of the 101st in Mosul, asked all of his troops, "What have you done for the people of Iraq today?" Mattis, my boss in Al Anbar in 2004, made the motto of the 1st Marine Division, "No better friend, no worse enemy, first do no harm." Right? Truly a remarkable situation. In order to win that kind of war, in order to create security and stability in that environment, you cannot kill or capture your way to success. Whatever caused those insurgents to emerge from the Sea of the People will simply cause, literally, their brothers, right, to rise up and replace them and probably bring some of their friends along. So to defeat that kind of insurgency, what you have to do, again in Mao's phrase, is drain the swamp. That is, decrease the number of people who support the ends of the insurgency, and the way to do that is by increasing the number who support the government or the coalition. The Secretary said it's hard to conceive of any country challenging the U.S. directly on the ground, at least for some years to come. Instead, we can expect that asymmetric warfare will remain the mainstay of the contemporary battlefield for some time. In fact, I would go so far as to argue that in the 20th century, the primary challenge of international relations was states that are too strong. In the 21st century, it may well be that the primary challenge to powers, to established powers, is states that are too weak. And if that is in fact the case, we need a very different military and a very different national security establishment to cope with that new reality. And FM 3-24, a radical field manual, in Sarah's words, a step in that direction, but only the first step.
In part, the military has done its job too well, and we've been able to believe that we didn't need these other capacities. But the issue of the purposes to which this capacity will be put is irrelevant because we don't have consensus at the strategic level. If you don't have consensus at the strategic level, not only will you not have congressional support via budgeting, you won't have the support of the individual people that you ultimately need.
We are currently building an army that is more like the State Department. But we also need to build a State Department and other agencies of the U.S. government that are more like the Army.
Two of the tasks that the Center, CNAS, has set for ourselves over the next year is one is to try to articulate the basis for a new national security strategy, that conceptual framework that Sarah was talking about, and second, to do a very detailed study looking at civilian capacity. Why is it needed? What are the different models for building it, deploying it, utilizing it, and what makes the most sense to sort of have ready for a new administration coming in some notion of a way forward.